My name is Olivia and I'm 34 years old. I've been married to my husband James for almost 10 years now, and we have two beautiful children, our son Ethan who's 8, and our daughter Lily who just turned 5 last month. On paper, we're what most people would consider a typical suburban family. James works in finance, I run a small online business from home while taking care of our kids, and we live in a modest but comfortable house in a nice neighborhood outside of Boston. What that perfect-looking family portrait doesn't show is the years of sacrifice that went into building this life. I gave up my promising career in marketing to raise our children because childcare costs were astronomical. I moved away from my hometown and my parents, who are the most loving, supportive people you could imagine, because James's job offer here was too good to pass up. I've spent countless nights alone with sick kids while James traveled for work. I've swallowed my pride more times than I can count to keep the peace with my in-laws, particularly my mother-in-law Patricia. Patricia has always been difficult. From the moment James introduced me to his parents 12 years ago, I could tell his mother had already decided I wasn't good enough for her precious son. She was polite on the surface, she's always careful to maintain appearances, but there was always an undercurrent of judgment in every interaction we had. Oh, marketing? That's interesting. I always hoped James would end up with someone with a more prestigious career path. His ex-girlfriend was in medical school, you know? Comments like that were commonplace during those early years. I tried not to let them get to me. James would always say, "That's just how Mom is. She means well." But I knew better. I could see through the thin veneer of politeness to the disapproval underneath. When we got married, Patricia made comments about how my dress was simple, and how she would have chosen something more elegant for her only son's wedding. When I got pregnant with Ethan, she suggested names from James's side of the family, completely dismissing any suggestions I made. When Lily was born, she commented that the baby didn't look much like James. A subtle jab that still makes my blood boil when I think about it. For years I tolerated it. I smiled through gritted teeth during holiday dinners. I accepted her backhanded compliments about my cooking, my parenting, my home decor, everything. I did it because I loved James and these people were his family. I did it because I believed in respecting your elders, even when they didn't necessarily deserve it. I did it because I thought that's what a good wife and daughter-in-law was supposed to do. Then, 3 years ago, Patricia had a stroke. It wasn't severe enough to affect her mental faculties or her speech, but it did significantly impact her mobility. She now uses a wheelchair most of the time, though she can stand and take a few steps with assistance. Since then, our family dynamic has shifted dramatically. Patricia's husband, George, is still active and healthy, but he's never been particularly hands-on when it comes to caretaking responsibilities. James has 2 siblings, a brother who lives on the opposite coast and a sister who's always too busy with her own family to help much. So naturally, a significant portion of Patricia's care fell to us, or more specifically, to me. Every Sunday without fail, we would go to their house for dinner. I would cook, clean up afterward, help Patricia to the bathroom when needed, and listen to her complaints and criticisms for hours. During the week, I would often receive calls asking me to come over to help with some task that George couldn't or wouldn't do. I drove her to doctor's appointments, picked up her prescriptions, and did her grocery shopping, all while raising 2 children, running my small business, and maintaining my own household. And through it all, Patricia continued to be Patricia. The stroke hadn't changed her personality one bit. If anything, her condition had made her more entitled, more demanding, and yes, more critical, especially of me. But I persevered. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that things would get better, that Patricia would eventually see how much I was doing for her and show some appreciation. I kept making excuses for her behavior. She was frustrated by her condition. She was from a different generation. She was worried about becoming a burden. Until last month when everything changed. It was Mother's Day, and my mom had flown in from Ohio to spend the weekend with us. It was the first time she'd been able to visit in over a year, and I was beyond excited to see her. My mom, Diane, is everything Patricia is not: warm, kind, supportive, and genuinely grateful for even the smallest gestures of help or affection. Mom had brought handmade gifts for the kids and a beautiful framed family photo for our living room. She had insisted on cooking dinner that night to give me a break, and she'd spent the afternoon playing board games with Ethan and Lily while I finally had some time to myself. It was one of those perfect days that you wish could last forever. Until the phone rang at 7:30 p.m. It was Patricia, her voice laced with barely concealed irritation. James isn't answering his phone. We're having an issue with the television, and George can't figure it out. We need someone to come over and fix it. James was in the shower, and I was helping my mom clean up the kitchen after dinner. I explained this to Patricia and suggested that perhaps we could come over the following day instead. Well, we wanted to watch our show tonight, she replied, as if that settled the matter completely. It starts in 30 minutes. I looked at my mom, who was drying dishes and pretending not to listen to the conversation, though I could tell from her expression that she could hear Patricia's demanding tone through the phone. Okay, I sighed, knowing it wasn't worth the argument. We'll be over as soon as James is ready. Make sure you come soon, Patricia said before hanging up, not bothering with a thank you. 20 minutes later, James, the kids, my mom, and I were all piling into our SUV to head to Patricia and George's house. I had suggested that my mom stay at our place and relax, but she had insisted on coming along, saying she'd like to meet James's parents since they hadn't been able to attend our wedding due to a scheduling conflict, which I later discovered was actually a cruise they'd booked months after our wedding date had been set. When we arrived, George answered the door with a relieved expression. "Thank goodness you're here," he said, as if we were emergency services responding to a crisis rather than family members being inconvenienced on a holiday evening. She's been in a state about missing her program. We all filed into their immaculate living room, where Patricia sat regally in her wheelchair like a queen on a throne. She barely acknowledged my mother's presence, giving her only the briefest of nods before turning her attention to James. "The remote isn't working properly," she complained. "And George is useless with technology." James went over to investigate while I made the formal introductions. "Patricia, George, this is my mother, Diane. Mom, these are James's parents." My mom stepped forward with a warm smile and extended her hand. "It's so nice to finally meet you both. Olivia has told me so much about you." George shook her hand politely. Patricia merely looked her up and down before saying, "Charmed, I'm sure." The chill in the air was palpable. I caught my mom's eye and gave her an apologetic look, which she returned with a small, understanding smile. This was precisely why I had been hesitant about them meeting all these years. It turned out the TV issue was simply that the batteries in the remote needed replacing. James fixed it in under 2 minutes, but of course now that we were there, Patricia insisted we all stay to visit for a while. She directed this mainly at James and the children, making it clear that my mom and I were merely accessories to the visit. Patricia asked the kids about school and their activities, though she barely listened to their answers before steering the conversation back to herself or to James. She reminisced about James's childhood accomplishments, clearly trying to establish her superiority as a mother. She asked James detailed questions about work, nodding approvingly at his answers while occasionally shooting pointed looks at me, as if to say, "See what my son has accomplished without your help." Through it all, my mom sat quietly, smiling and being unfailingly polite. She tried to engage in the conversation several times, but Patricia would quickly talk over her or change the subject. After about an hour of this, the kids were getting restless, and I was at my wits' end. "We should probably head home," I said, standing up. "It's getting late, and the kids have school tomorrow." "Oh, before you go," my mom said, reaching into her purse, "I brought something for you both." She pulled out 2 small, beautifully wrapped packages and handed them to Patricia and George. "Just a little thank you for raising such a wonderful son. Olivia and James have built a beautiful life together, and I'm grateful every day that they found each other." I could have cried at my mom's generosity of spirit. Even after being treated so dismissively all evening, she was still extending an olive branch. George seemed genuinely touched. "Well, that's very kind of you, Diane. Thank you." Patricia unwrapped her gift, a handmade scarf in a gorgeous deep blue that my mother had knitted herself, and gave it a cursory glance. "How homespun," she said, setting it aside without another word. The drive home was quiet. The kids fell asleep in the back seat, and my mom stared out the window, lost in thought. James drove with one hand on the wheel, the other holding mine, occasionally giving it a squeeze as if to say he knew the evening had been difficult. When we got home and put the kids to bed, my mom insisted she wasn't bothered by Patricia's behavior. Some people are just unhappy in their own skin, honey, she said, giving me a hug. Don't let it get to you. But I could see the hurt in her eyes and it broke my heart. My mom, who had worked 2 jobs to put me through college, who had taught me the value of kindness and respect, who had never said an unkind word about anyone, had been treated like she was nothing by a woman who had never had to struggle a day in her life. The next day was the last of my mom's visit. We spent it doing tourist things around Boston, visiting the aquarium, walking part of the Freedom Trail, and having lunch at a nice restaurant by the harbor. It was a perfect day, and seeing my mom laugh and enjoy herself helped ease some of the sting from the previous night's encounter. We dropped her at the airport that evening, with promises to visit Ohio soon and long hugs that neither of us wanted to end. As we watched her disappear through the security checkpoint, I felt that familiar ache of missing her before she was even gone. The following Sunday came all too quickly, and it was time for our regular dinner at Patricia and George's house. I was still nursing my feelings about how they had treated my mom, but I put on a brave face for James's sake. He had apologized profusely for his parents' behavior and had even called them himself to express his disappointment, but Patricia had brushed it off, claiming my mom had been overly sensitive and that she had been perfectly cordial. We arrived at their house at the usual time, and I went through the motions of preparing dinner while James chatted with his parents in the living room. The kids were in the backyard with George, who was showing them how to use the new croquet set he had bought. I was in the kitchen, slicing vegetables for a salad, when I heard Patricia's voice drift in from the adjacent dining room. She didn't know I was there. The door between the rooms was partially closed, and she clearly thought I was still outside with the children. I still can't believe the mother, Patricia was saying to James, her voice dripping with disdain. Did you see what she was wearing? That dreadful department store dress must have been at least 10 years old. And those shoes, good heavens, they looked like something a waitress would wear. My knife paused mid-slice. I held my breath, not wanting to miss a word. Mom, that's enough, James said, his voice tight with discomfort. Diane was perfectly nice, and her clothes are none of our business. I'm just saying it's clear where Olivia gets her pedestrian tastes from, Patricia continued, ignoring James's objection. That homemade scarf she gave me. Can you imagine? As if I shop at craft fairs. I put it straight in the donation box. My heart was pounding in my ears. My mom had spent weeks making that scarf, carefully selecting the yarn because she thought the color would complement Patricia's eyes. You know, James, Patricia went on, lowering her voice slightly, though not enough that I couldn't hear every word. You could have done so much better. Melissa was from a good family, with proper upbringing. She knew how to dress, how to entertain. She would have been an asset to your career, not like. That's enough. James's voice was sharp, angrier than I'd heard it in a long time. I don't want to hear another word about Melissa or about Olivia's family. Olivia is my wife, the mother of my children, and the love of my life. And her mother is one of the kindest, most genuine people I've ever met. I'm ashamed of how you treated her, and I'm even more ashamed of what you're saying now. There was a heavy silence and then Patricia's voice, small and wounded. I don't know why you're speaking to me this way. I'm your mother. I'm only looking out for your best interests. No, you're looking out for your own interests, James replied, his voice calmer but still firm. You always have been. I heard the sound of his chair scraping back, and I quickly resumed chopping, trying to look busy when he entered the kitchen a moment later. But one look at my face must have told him everything. You heard, he said softly, coming to stand beside me. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without breaking down. The knife trembled in my hand, and James gently took it from me, setting it on the cutting board before pulling me into his arms. I'm so sorry, he whispered into my hair. She had no right to say those things. None of it is true. I clung to him, tears burning behind my eyes but not falling. I was too angry to cry, too hurt, too done with all of it. I want to leave, I said quietly against his chest. I don't want to be here right now. James nodded without hesitation. Let's go. I'll get the kids. But as he started to pull away, I stopped him. Something had shifted inside me. A lifetime of taking the high road, of turning the other cheek, of putting everyone else's feelings above my own suddenly felt like a weight I could no longer bear. No, I said, straightening my shoulders. I need to say something first. James looked at me for a long moment, then nodded again. Okay. I'm right here with you. We walked into the dining room together, where Patricia sat alone at the table, her wheelchair pulled up to her usual spot at the head. She looked up as we entered, her expression a carefully composed mask of innocent concern. Is everything all right? She asked, as if she hadn't just been tearing apart my family's worth and dignity. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. 10 years of pent-up frustration, hurt and anger were coursing through me. But I was determined to remain calm. I would not give her the satisfaction of dismissing me as emotional or hysterical. No, Patricia, everything is not all right, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I heard what you said about my mother. A flicker of something, shock? Guilt? Fear? Crossed her face before she composed herself again. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, she said dismissively, reaching for her water glass with a hand that trembled slightly. I think you do, I replied, still calm. I heard every word, Patricia. About my mom's clothes, about the scarf she made for you, about how James could have done better than me. Patricia's eyes darted to James, clearly expecting him to step in and smooth things over as he had always done before. But James stood silently beside me, his presence a solid wall of support. You've misunderstood, Patricia said finally, when it became clear James wasn't going to rescue her. I was merely making an observation about different backgrounds, different standards. Some people prioritize appearances, others don't. There's nothing wrong with that. My mother worked 60-hour weeks at 2 jobs to put food on our table and to make sure I could go to college, I said, feeling heat rise to my face despite my efforts to stay cool. She didn't have time for shopping sprees or spa days or lunch with the ladies. She was too busy making sure I had opportunities she never had. Patricia sniffed. Well, that's very admirable, I'm sure. But I'm not finished, I interrupted, surprising even myself with my boldness. My mother has more class, kindness, and genuine grace in her little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. She taught me the meaning of sacrifice, of unconditional love, of treating others with respect regardless of what they can do for you. And I have watched for 10 years as you've looked down your nose at me, criticized everything I do, and treated me like I was something you stepped in rather than your son's wife and the mother of your grandchildren. Patricia's face had gone pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. But I wasn't done. And despite all that, I have driven you to every doctor's appointment. I have cooked your meals, cleaned your house, pushed your wheelchair, listened to your complaints. I have bent over backward trying to earn your approval or at least your basic respect. And you repay that by mocking my mother, who has never done anything but try to be kind to you behind her back. Patricia's eyes were wide now, her usual composure cracking. I don't know what you want me to say, she stammered. I don't want you to say anything, I replied, my voice finally beginning to shake with emotion. I want you to listen. I am done. Do you understand me? Done. I will not be your unpaid caretaker anymore. I will not subject myself or my children to your judgment and criticism anymore. I took a step closer to her, looking her directly in the eyes. From now on, you can call your other children to push your wheelchair. You can call them when your TV remote needs new batteries. You can call them to cook your Sunday dinners. Because I am not moving another finger for someone who has so little respect for me and my family. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia stared at me, mouth agape, completely at a loss for words, perhaps for the first time in her life. George appeared in the doorway, the children behind him, all of them frozen at the tension that filled the room. What's going on? George asked, looking from me to Patricia to James in confusion. We're leaving, I said simply, turning to the children with a smile that took every ounce of strength I had left. Go get your things, guys. We're going home. As the kids scurried off to collect their jackets and toys, I turned back to Patricia one last time. The saddest part of all this, Patricia, is that you've been so focused on status and appearances that you've missed out on knowing some truly wonderful people, including your own grandchildren. They're kind, smart, funny, and caring, qualities they certainly didn't learn from you. With that, I walked out of the room, head held high, feeling as if a massive weight had been lifted from my shoulders. James followed close behind, his hand on the small of my back. A silent gesture of solidarity that meant more to me than words could express. As we loaded the confused but cooperative children into the car, I finally let the tears come. They weren't tears of sadness or hurt, though. They were tears of relief. Of release. Of finally standing up not just for myself but for my mom, for my children, for the values I believed in. James drove us home in silence, reaching over occasionally to squeeze my hand or wipe away a stray tear from my cheek. When we pulled into our driveway, he turned to me before getting out of the car. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "I should have done that years ago. I'm sorry I didn't." I leaned over and kissed him gently. "It wasn't your job to fight my battles. But thank you for standing with me today." That night, after the kids were in bed, James and I sat on our back porch with glasses of wine, talking about what had happened and what would happen next. We decided that we would take a break from Sunday dinners at his parents' house for the foreseeable future. James would still check in on them and help out when needed, but I was officially off duty as Patricia's personal assistant and emotional punching bag. "She'll come around eventually," James said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "When she realizes what she's lost." I wasn't so sure. People like Patricia rarely admit when they're wrong, rarely see the damage they cause with their words and actions. But it didn't matter anymore. I had finally found my voice, finally drawn a line in the sand, and it felt incredible. The next morning, I called my mom and told her everything that had happened. She listened quietly, occasionally making small sounds of sympathy or encouragement. "Oh, honey," she said when I had finished. "I'm sorry you had to go through that. But I'm so proud of you for standing up for yourself. It's about time. I just kept thinking about what you always told me growing up," I said, smiling at the memory. "That we should treat others with kindness and respect, but never let anyone make us feel small." "Exactly," my mom replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "You can be kind without being a doormat." It took me a long time to learn that lesson myself. We talked for another hour, making plans for them to come visit again soon, this time staying in our home without any awkward visits to the in-laws. By the time we hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years, as if I had finally shed an invisible burden I'd been carrying for too long. The next few days passed in a blur of normal family life, school drop-offs and pickups, work deadlines, laundry, dinner preparations. James received several calls from his father, updating him on the fallout from my confrontation. Patricia was beside herself, apparently alternating between tearful self-pity and righteous indignation. She couldn't believe I would abandon her in her time of need. She couldn't believe James was allowing me to keep his children from their grandmother. But I held firm to my decision. For the first time in 10 years, I had prioritized my own well-being and self-respect over keeping the peace, and I wasn't about to backtrack. James supported me completely, making it clear to his parents that while he loved them, he would not tolerate them disrespecting his wife or her family. A week after the confrontation, the doorbell rang one afternoon while James was at work and the kids were at school. I was in my home office finalizing a marketing campaign for a client when I heard it. Assuming it was a package delivery, I was surprised to find George standing on my doorstep when I opened the door. "George," I said, momentarily taken aback. "Is everything okay?" He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Can I come in for a minute, Olivia? I'd like to talk to you." I hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. Whatever this was about, I doubted it would be a pleasant conversation, but I was no longer afraid of confrontation. That ship had sailed. I led him into the living room and offered him a drink, which he declined. We sat across from each other, an awkward silence stretching between us for a moment before he finally spoke. "Patricia sent me," he admitted, looking down at his hands. "She wanted me to smooth things over." I raised an eyebrow. "Smooth things over? Is that code for convince Olivia to come back and take care of me because no one else will?" George had the decency to look embarrassed. "Something like that, yes," he conceded. "Her sister came for a few days, but she's gone back home now. And the home health aide we hired. Well, Patricia didn't care for her methods." I couldn't help but laugh, though there was little humor in it. "Let me guess. The aide actually expected Patricia to do her exercises and didn't cater to her every whim?" George sighed heavily. "It's been challenging. The aide quit yesterday." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and despite everything I meant it. George was caught in the middle of a situation largely of Patricia's making, and I had always had a soft spot for him. He wasn't a bad man. Just passive and conflict avoidant to a fault. But I hope you understand that I can't go back to how things were. I do understand, he said, surprising me. That's not actually why I'm here. That caught me off guard. It's not. George shook his head, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wrapped package. Patricia doesn't know I'm here. I came to give you this. He handed me the package. It was soft, wrapped in tissue paper. As I opened it, I realized it was the blue scarf my mother had knitted for Patricia. I rescued it from the donation box, George explained. I thought your mother might like to have it back, rather than have it given away. I stared at the scarf in my hands, emotion welling up inside me. The fact that George had gone behind Patricia's back to retrieve it, that he'd made the effort to return it to us, spoke volumes about the kind of man he truly was beneath the years of enabling Patricia's behavior. Thank you, I said softly. This means a lot, George. He nodded, looking slightly relieved. Your mother seems like a lovely woman. I'm sorry she was treated poorly. She is lovely, I agreed. And thank you for saying that. George stood up, clearly ready to leave. For what it's worth, Olivia, I think you've been a wonderful daughter-in-law. I've watched you bend over backwards for this family for years, and I've never said anything, never stepped in when Patricia went too far. I should have, and I'm sorry for that. This unexpected apology left me momentarily speechless. In all the years I'd known him, George had never directly acknowledged Patricia's behavior or his role in enabling it. I appreciate that, George, I finally managed to say. Really? He headed toward the door, then paused. I don't expect this changes anything. I understand why you needed to draw that line and you were right to do it. But I wanted you to know that, well, not everyone in the family shares Patricia's views. As I watched him drive away, the blue scarf clutched in my hands, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Vindication, yes, but also an unexpected sadness for the relationship with my in-laws that could have been but never was. And surprisingly, a small seed of hope that perhaps things could be different moving forward. Not the same as before, certainly, but maybe something healthier, more balanced. I called my mom that evening and told her about George's visit and the returned scarf. She was touched by the gesture, though she insisted I should keep the scarf for myself since Patricia clearly didn't want it. I made it with love, she said, and I'd rather it be worn by someone who appreciates it. So I kept it, and every time I wore it, I was reminded of my mother's generosity and George's small act of rebellion. Life settled into a new routine over the next few weeks. James visited his parents occasionally, usually taking the kids with him for short visits. I stayed home during these times, enjoying the quiet, guilt-free solitude. The kids would come back with stories of how Grandma seemed sadder, and asked about me a lot, but otherwise the arrangements seemed to be working. Then, about a month after the confrontation, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. Olivia, this is Patricia. I'd like to speak with you when you have a moment. Alone. I stared at the message for a long time, my heart racing. I hadn't spoken to Patricia since that Sunday dinner, and I wasn't sure I was ready to now. But curiosity won out, and I replied, I'm free tomorrow afternoon around 2. You can call me then. Her response came quickly. I'd prefer to meet in person. Could you come to the house? George will make himself scarce. The thought of going back to their house, of sitting across from Patricia in that formal living room where so many uncomfortable moments had transpired, made my stomach clench. But perhaps it was best to have this conversation on neutral ground, rather than inviting her into my home. Fine. 2 p.m. tomorrow, I texted back. That night I barely slept. James tried to reassure me, saying that the fact Patricia wanted to talk was a good sign, but I wasn't convinced. Knowing her, this could just as easily be an attempt to manipulate me back into my caretaker role as a genuine reconciliation effort. The next day, I drove to their house with a sense of dread hanging over me. I had dressed carefully, not too casual, which Patricia would read as disrespectful, but not too formal either, which might suggest this meeting was more important to me than it was. I settled on dark jeans, a nice blouse, and a light cardigan. Professional but relaxed. George opened the door when I arrived, giving me a nervous smile. She's in the sunroom. he said, taking my coat. I'm heading out to run some errands. I'll be back in an hour or so. I nodded, steeling myself as I walked through the familiar house toward the sunroom at the back. Patricia was sitting in her wheelchair by the windows, looking out at the garden. She seemed smaller, somehow diminished. When she heard me enter, she turned, and I was shocked to see how tired she looked. There were new lines around her eyes and mouth, and she had lost weight. "Olivia," she said, her voice lacking its usual imperious tone. "Thank you for coming." I took a seat in the chair opposite her, maintaining a safe distance. "You wanted to talk," I said simply. Patricia nodded, her hands fidgeting in her lap. A nervous gesture I had never seen from her before. She had always been so controlled, so composed. "I'm not very good at this," she began, not quite meeting my eyes. "Apologies have never been my strong suit." I remained silent, waiting. If this was going to be an apology, I wanted to hear it in full, not help her along or let her off the hook. "What you overheard me say about your mother was inexcusable," she continued after a moment. "It was cruel and untrue, and I'm deeply ashamed of it." This blunt acknowledgement surprised me. I had expected hedging, qualifications, excuses. Not this straightforward admission. "Why did you say it then?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Patricia sighed, looking out the window again. "Because I'm a jealous, insecure old woman," she said quietly. "Because I saw how James lights up around your mother, how the children adore her, how even George commented on what a lovely person she is. And I compared that to how people react to me, and I was envious." This vulnerability, this honest self-assessment, was so unexpected that I didn't know how to respond. Patricia had always presented herself as supremely confident, above such petty emotions as jealousy or insecurity. "That doesn't excuse what I said," she added quickly. "Nothing could. But you asked why, and that's the truth. Your mother has a warmth, a genuine kindness that people are drawn to. I've never been that way. I've always maintained relationships through obligation, through social connections, through family ties. Not through love." She spoke the word as if it were foreign to her, uncomfortable on her tongue. "The past month has been illuminating," Patricia continued when I didn't speak. "Without you here, without your help, I've had to rely on a rotating cast of characters: my sister, who couldn't wait to leave, a home health aide who found me impossible, neighbors who help out of duty rather than affection." She paused, looking down at her hands again. "No one wants to be around me, Olivia. No one chooses my company when they have other options. That's a hard truth to face at 74. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy for her. What a lonely realization to come to so late in life. "I'm sorry for how I've treated you over the years," she went on, her voice a little stronger now. "I've been critical, dismissive, ungrateful. I told myself I was helping you become the kind of wife and mother James deserved. But the truth is, you've always been exactly what he needed. What this family needed. I was just too threatened by that to admit it." I took a deep breath, trying to process this unexpected turn. "Why are you telling me all this now, Patricia? What do you want from me?" She finally looked directly at me, her eyes clear and determined despite the moisture gathering in them. "I don't want anything from you, Olivia. I don't expect you to forgive me, or to resume helping me. I certainly don't expect us to suddenly become close. I needed to say these things, to acknowledge the harm I've caused, and to thank you for everything you've done for me, even when I made it as difficult as possible." I sat there stunned. Of all the scenarios I had imagined for this meeting, a genuine, no-strings-attached apology had not been among them. "I don't know what to say," I admitted finally. "You don't need to say anything," Patricia replied. "I didn't ask you here for absolution. Just to speak my piece." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the tension in the room slowly shifting to something less adversarial, though still far from comfortable. "Your mother," Patricia said eventually. "How is she?" "She's well," I answered cautiously. "Planning to visit again for the kids' summer break." Patricia nodded. Would you tell her I'm sorry? For how I behaved when she was here. And for what I said afterward." "I'll tell her," I promised, though I wasn't sure how much detail I would share. My mom didn't need to know the exact cruel words that had been spoken about her. The scarf she made. Patricia began, then hesitated. George told me he gave it to you. It was beautiful, really. I should have appreciated it. She makes them for people she cares about, I said. Or wants to care about. She spent weeks on it. Patricia winced visibly at this. I've made a lot of mistakes, Olivia. I don't know if I can fix them all. But I'm trying to start somewhere. As I drove home after our conversation, my mind was reeling. Patricia's apology had seemed sincere. More sincere than I would have thought her capable of. But a lifetime of behavior doesn't change overnight. And one moment of vulnerability doesn't erase years of criticism and judgment. I told James about the meeting that evening after the kids were in bed. He listened intently, occasionally asking questions but mostly just letting me process the experience out loud. Do you believe her? He asked when I had finished. I considered the question carefully. I believe she meant what she said today, I answered finally. Whether that translates to lasting change, I don't know. So what happens now? James asked, taking my hand in his. Now we take it one day at a time, I said. I'm not going back to being her unpaid caretaker. That boundary stays firmly in place. But maybe we can start rebuilding something new. Something healthier. James smiled, squeezing my hand. I'm proud of you, you know that? Not just for standing up to her, but for being willing to listen today. Most people wouldn't have even shown up. I leaned against him, grateful for his steady support through all of this. I didn't do it for her, I admitted. I did it for us. For our family. Cutting your parents off completely would have been easier in some ways, but not better in the long run. The next Sunday, we decided to visit Patricia and George as a family. It was a brief visit, just an hour or so after lunch, but it was a start. Patricia was on her best behavior, making a visible effort to be warm and engaged with the children. She even asked me about my work, listening with what appeared to be genuine interest as I explained my current projects. As we were leaving, she touched my arm lightly, holding me back for a moment as James and the kids headed to the car. Thank you for coming today, she said quietly. I know you didn't have to. I nodded, acknowledging the olive branch for what it was. Baby steps, Patricia. Baby steps, she agreed with a small smile. Over the next few months, we established a new, more balanced relationship with my in-laws. We visited every other Sunday for a short time, and occasionally Patricia and George would come to our house for dinner. I helped with certain things, organizing Patricia's medications or driving her to an appointment when George couldn't, but on my terms as a choice rather than an obligation. Patricia still had her moments, of course. Old habits die hard, and there were still occasional critical comments or passive-aggressive remarks. But now, instead of swallowing my feelings, I would calmly call her out. That sounded like a criticism, Patricia. Is that what you meant? Or, I'm not comfortable with comments about my parenting decisions. Please respect that. And surprisingly, she would usually apologize and correct herself. Not always gracefully, but she tried, which was more than I could have imagined a few months earlier. The real test came when my parents visited for 2 weeks during the summer. I had been dreading the potential conflicts, but Patricia surprised me yet again. She invited us all over for dinner one evening, insisting on catering rather than having me cook, and made a visible effort to engage with my parents in a way she never had before. My mom, being the gracious person she is, met these efforts more than halfway, chatting easily with Patricia about gardening, a shared interest I hadn't even known they had. By the end of the evening, they were exchanging email addresses to share pictures of their flower beds, a development so unexpected it left both James and me slightly dumbfounded. As we were saying our goodbyes, I noticed Patricia pull my mom aside for a private word. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw my mom's expression soften, saw her pat Patricia's hand gently, and then, most surprisingly of all, saw them share a brief but genuine hug. Later that night, I asked my mom what Patricia had said to her. She apologized, Mom told me simply, for not welcoming me properly before, for being too wrapped up in her own insecurities to see me as a person rather than a threat. It was a lovely apology, actually. Very heartfelt. I shook my head in amazement. Who would have thought? Mom smiled, patting my cheek affectionately. People can change, honey. Especially when they're confronted with the consequences of their actions. You gave Patricia that gift, even though it was hard. I wasn't trying to change her, I admitted. I was just trying to protect myself, to set boundaries. And that's exactly what she needed, Mom replied. Someone to finally say enough. It gave her the opportunity to look at herself, maybe for the first time in a long time. As the summer turned to fall and fall to winter, our new family dynamic continued to evolve. We spent Thanksgiving at our house, with both sets of parents in attendance. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments and the occasional tense exchange, but it was so much better than it had been. And on Christmas Eve, as we all gathered in our living room, the children excitedly placing cookies for Santa, both grandmothers working together to hang stockings, both grandfathers arguing good-naturedly about the best way to build a fire, I caught James's eye across the room. He smiled at me, a smile that said he saw what I saw. A family healing, growing, becoming what it always should have been. Later, after the kids were in bed and our parents had gone to their hotels, James and I sat by the Christmas tree, enjoying a quiet moment together. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" he asked, his arm around my shoulders. I leaned into him, watching the lights twinkle on the tree. Honestly? No. I thought the best-case scenario was that we'd establish firm boundaries and maintain a distant but civil relationship. And instead we got something that almost resembles a normal functional family, James mused. Well, let's not get carried away, I laughed. We're still a work in progress. James kissed the top of my head. True. But progress is the key word there. And it all started because you finally stood up for yourself and your mom that day. I thought about that moment, about the rush of emotions I'd felt as I'd finally spoken my truth after years of silence. It had been terrifying and liberating all at once. I wish I'd done it sooner, I admitted. You did it when you were ready, James replied. And that's what matters. The next morning, as the children tore through their presents with unbridled enthusiasm, and our parents sipped coffee and watched the chaos with indulgent smiles, I took a moment to really look at Patricia. She was sitting in her wheelchair, wearing the new scarf my mother had made for her. A Christmas green this time. Laughing at something Lily had said. She caught my eye and gave me a small, tentative smile, which I returned without hesitation. In that moment I realized something important. Setting boundaries wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about creating space for honest communication, for genuine relationships to form. By refusing to continue the charade of the perfect acquiescent daughter-in-law, by demanding respect not just for myself but for my mother and my values, I had inadvertently given Patricia the opportunity to become a better version of herself. It wasn't my responsibility to change her, and I hadn't set out to do so. But by changing the dynamic between us, by refusing to play my assigned role in our dysfunctional family drama, I had created the possibility for everyone to step into new, healthier roles. As I watched Patricia handing Ethan a present, heard her genuine laugh at his excitement, saw the way she looked at him with unguarded love, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. Not for Patricia's transformation, that was her own accomplishment, but for my own courage in standing up that day, for refusing to continue accepting treatment that diminished me and the people I loved. It had been a single moment, a line drawn in the sand after years of yielding ground. But that moment had changed everything. Not instantly, not completely, but significantly and lastingly. Later that afternoon, as we all sat around the dinner table enjoying our Christmas feast, Patricia raised her glass for a toast. To family, she said, her eyes moving around the table and lingering meaningfully on me. And to new beginnings. To new beginnings. We all echoed, glasses clinking. My mother caught my eye across the table and gave me a small, knowing smile. In that smile was everything we didn't need to say out loud. Pride, love, understanding. My mom had always taught me to stand up for myself, to know my own worth. It had taken me longer than it should have to apply that lesson to my relationship with my in-laws, but I had finally gotten there. As dinner wound down and conversation flowed comfortably around the table, I found myself watching the scene with a sense of wonder. This was not the family dynamic I had endured for 10 years. This was not the tense, walking on eggshells atmosphere that had dominated so many previous family gatherings. This was what family should be. Imperfect people loving each other imperfectly but genuinely, making space for growth and change, holding each other accountable but also offering grace. It had taken a confrontation, one that had terrified me for years, to get us here. It had taken finding my voice, speaking my truth, and being willing to face the consequences, whatever they might be. And those consequences had been, against all expectations, the beginning of healing rather than the end of relationship. That evening, after the dinner dishes were done and everyone was relaxing in the living room, Patricia motioned me over to where she sat by the window. "I've been thinking about what to get you for Christmas," she said quietly. "Something meaningful, not just another sweater or kitchen gadget. And I realized that what I really want to give you is something I should have given you years ago." She reached into the small bag hanging from her wheelchair and pulled out an envelope, handing it to me. Curious, I opened it to find a handwritten letter. At the top was written, "Things I should have said before." "Don't read it now," Patricia said, touching my hand lightly. "Read it when you're alone. It's all the things I should have told you over the years. About what a wonderful mother you are. What a perfect partner you've been for James. What a gift you've been to this family. Even when I didn't deserve it." I was speechless, the envelope suddenly feeling heavy in my hands. "You don't need to say anything," Patricia continued. "I just wanted you to know. I see you now, Olivia. I really see you. And I'm so grateful you gave me the chance to know the person I've been overlooking all these years." Tears pricked at my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. I didn't want to cry, not here, not now. But there was something so raw, so genuine in Patricia's expression that it broke through my carefully maintained composure. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Patricia nodded, then glanced across the room to where my mother was showing the children how to play a card game. "Your mother raised an extraordinary daughter," she said softly. "I hope someday someone will say the same about me." I followed her gaze, watching my mom's patient hands guiding Lily's smaller ones as she arranged her cards, hearing her warm laugh as Ethan made a joke. Then I looked back at Patricia, who was watching them with a mixture of admiration and wistful longing. "It's never too late to change the story," I told her gently. "To be the mother, the grandmother, you want to be remembered as." Patricia's eyes met mine, bright with unshed tears but also with determination. "I'm counting on that," she said. That night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, I sat alone in our bedroom and read Patricia's letter. It was 4 pages long, filled with specific memories and observations, things about my parenting she had secretly admired, moments when my patience or creativity had impressed her, times when my love for James had touched her heart even as she pretended indifference. The letter ended with a simple paragraph. "I always thought that loving my son meant protecting him from making the wrong choices. I couldn't see that the best choice he ever made was you. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like, love that supports without smothering, that strengthens without controlling. I'm learning from you even now, and I'm grateful for the chance to be better, to do better, in whatever time I have left." I folded the letter carefully and put it back in its envelope, wiping away the tears that had fallen freely as I read. Then I went to find James, who was just finishing putting away the last of the Christmas gifts. "You okay?" he asked, noticing my reddened eyes. I nodded, wrapping my arms around him and resting my head on his chest. "Better than okay," I said. "I'm just thinking about how sometimes the hardest conversations, the ones we avoid for years, turn out to be the ones that set us free." James held me close, his heartbeat steady under my ear. "You set us all free," he said softly, "by being brave enough to speak the truth, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard." And in that moment I knew it was true. By finally standing up for myself and my mother that day in Patricia's dining room, I had broken a pattern that had held us all captive for too long. I had created space for honesty, for growth, for a new kind of relationship to form from the ashes of the old. It hadn't been easy, and it hadn't happened overnight. There had been difficult conversations, awkward moments, steps forward and back. But we had persevered, all of us, finding our way to a new understanding, a new respect for each other's boundaries and feelings. And in the end, the woman who had once made me feel small, insignificant, and perpetually lacking had given me one of the greatest gifts of all. The acknowledgement of my worth, not just as a caretaker or a daughter-in-law, but as a person deserving of respect and appreciation. As James and I turned out the lights and headed upstairs to bed, I thought about the journey we had all taken this year. From tension and resentment to understanding and reconciliation. It wasn't perfect, and it probably never would be. But it was real and it was honest and it was so much better than what we had before. And it had all started with a single moment of courage, a refusal to continue accepting the unacceptable, a decision to finally say, enough. Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything.